The Black Death, also known as the Great Pestilence, was one of the most devastating catastrophes in human history. Sweeping through Eurasia and North Africa in the mid-14th century, it claimed tens of millions of lives and transformed the very fabric of medieval society. Arriving in Europe around 1347 and persisting in successive waves for centuries, it destroyed roughly one-third of Europe's population in just a few years. Yet to describe it merely as a disease is insufficient. The Black Death was a phenomenon that united biology, trade, warfare, religion, economy, and culture, and to examine it is to understand both the fragility and resilience of human civilization. The origins of the Black Death can be traced back to the vast steppe regions of Central Asia, where the bacterium Yersinia pestis circulated naturally among rodent populations. Carried by fleas, the pathogen thrived in the burrows of marmots and other wild rodents. When black rats, which were closely tied to human settlements, became infected, the disease acquired a vehicle capable of following human trade routes. The 13th and 14th centuries were a period of unprecedented connectivity under the Mongol Empire. The Silk Road linked east and west, carrying not only goods but also pathogens. By the 1330s, plague had reached western China and the caravan routes of Central Asia. In 1346, during the Mongol siege of the Genoese trading colony of Kaffa in Crimea, plague erupted among the besieging army. Chroniclers later claimed that the Mongols, stricken with disease, hurled infected corpses over the city walls in what has sometimes been described as an early act of biological warfare. Whether this detail is literal or symbolic, what is certain is that ships leaving Kaffa carried the infection to Constantinople, the ports of the Mediterranean, and eventually to the heart of Europe. From its arrival in Messina, Sicily, in October 1347, the plague spread with terrifying speed. By early 1348, it had reached Genoa, Venice, and Florence. From Italy, it traveled to Marseilles, Avignon, and across the Pyrenees into Spain. By mid-1348, it was in Paris, by autumn in England, and soon it moved into the Low Countries, Germany, and Scandinavia. The velocity of the disease owed much to the mobility of medieval life. Merchants, pilgrims, and soldiers ensured that the infected rats and fleas were never far from the next town. Once established, plague could kill vast numbers in weeks. Florence, for example, lost perhaps half of its inhabitants. In London, Paris, and countless smaller towns, corpses overwhelmed burial capacity, forcing the creation of mass graves. The Italian poet Petrarch wrote in anguish to a friend, lamenting, "O happy posterity, who will not experience such abysmal woe, and will look upon our testimony as a fable." For him, the scale of suffering was beyond anything earlier generations could imagine. The disease manifested in multiple terrifying forms. The most common was bubonic plague, marked by painful swellings or buboes in the lymph nodes, particularly in the groin, armpit, and neck. Victims suffered fever, chills, delirium, and excruciating pain. Death often followed within 3 to 5 days. The pneumonic form attacked the lungs, producing violent coughing and bloody sputum, and spread directly through the air from person to person. The septicemic form infected the bloodstream, causing blackened skin and almost certain death within hours. Giovanni Boccaccio, in the introduction to his Decameron, described it with stark clarity. In men and women alike, it first betrayed itself by the emergence of certain swellings in the groin or the armpits, spreading in all directions indifferently, after which the form of the disease began to change to black or livid spots appearing on the arms and thighs and other parts of the body, sometimes large and few, at other times minute and numerous. These details left no doubt of the horror and hopelessness faced by victims. Medieval medicine proved utterly powerless. Physicians, trained in Galenic theory, believed illness arose from imbalances in the four humors or from miasmas, poisonous airs. Treatments included bloodletting, cupping, burning herbs, the use of amulets, and even carrying sweet-smelling flowers in hopes of purifying the air. In some cities, plague doctors appeared, dressed in long robes and bird-like masks filled with aromatic substances to ward off contagion. Yet these efforts were ineffective. Priests, physicians, and civic leaders died alongside peasants and merchants. The inability of medicine and the church to protect communities shook confidence in traditional authority. The psychological impact was immense. Families disintegrated as members abandoned one another in fear. Chroniclers describe fathers refusing to nurse their children, husbands deserting wives, and neighbors sealing their doors against cries for help. In Florence, Boccaccio recorded how people fled to the countryside or barricaded themselves in side homes, while others plunged into reckless pleasure, convinced death was inevitable. He wrote, "Some maintained that an infallible way of warding off this appalling evil was to drink heavily, enjoy life's pleasures, go around singing and merrymaking, gratify all one's cravings, and shrug the thing off as an enormous joke." Such extremes revealed both the despair and the defiance that gripped society. Religious responses ranged from pious devotion to fanaticism. Many saw the plague as divine punishment for sin, and some turned to extreme penance. The flagellant movement spread across Europe. Groups of men traveled from town to town, whipping themselves publicly in atonement, hoping to appease God's wrath. At the same time, religious prejudice intensified. Jews, already marginalized in medieval society, were accused of poisoning wells or conspiring to spread disease. Pogroms erupted across Germany, Switzerland, and parts of France. Entire communities were massacred, burned alive, or driven into exile. A German chronicle from Strasbourg records bluntly, "On Saturday, they burnt the Jews on a wooden platform in their cemetery. There were about 2,000 people of them. Those who wanted to baptize themselves were spared. Many small children were taken out of the fire and baptized against the will of their fathers and mothers. And everything that was owed to the Jews was canceled, and the council and the nobles divided the money among themselves." Fear, prejudice, and greed combined in acts of extraordinary cruelty. The economic consequences were equally profound. With perhaps a third of Europe's population dead, labor became scarce. Fields lay untilled, workshops silent, and harvests rotted. Landowners, desperate for workers, often offered better wages and freedoms to peasants. In many regions, this shift weakened the bonds of serfdom, undermining the feudal order. In England, attempts by the crown to freeze wages at pre-plague levels only fueled resentment, culminating in the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. Across Europe, the redistribution of wealth from dead to living altered property patterns, while the contraction of population forced changes in agriculture, moving from intensive grain farming to pastoral production. These disruptions accelerated long-term transformations in Europe's economy, paving the way for the gradual rise of a more flexible, market-oriented system. Cultural life also bore the mark of the Black Death. Art turned increasingly toward themes of death and mortality. The Danse Macabre, or Dance of Death, appeared on church walls and in manuscripts, showing skeletons leading kings, nobles, and peasants alike to the grave. The message was stark: death spared no one. Manuals on the art of dying well, known as Ars Moriendi, became popular. At the same time, literature absorbed and reflected on the trauma. Boccaccio's Decameron, written against the backdrop of plague, portrayed young Florentines escaping the city to tell stories, blending tragedy with humor, despair with resilience. In Northern Europe, writers such as William Langland in England and Heinrich von Herford in Germany echoed the theme of divine judgment and social decay. The plague heightened awareness of life's fragility and inspired both morbid fascination and creative response. Intellectually, the catastrophe weakened confidence in traditional authorities. The Church, which had failed to protect or explain the suffering, lost some of its moral prestige. While faith remained central, seeds of skepticism were sown that would later feed into the currents of Renaissance humanism and eventually the Reformation. The search for explanations also pushed inquiry beyond theology. Though limited, observations of contagion, quarantine measures, and public health ordinances began to emerge. Cities like Venice pioneered the use of quarantine, requiring ships to wait 40 days before disembarking, a practice that marked a significant step toward modern public health policy. The Black Death did not end in 1351. Recurring waves struck Europe for centuries. Outbreaks reappeared in the 15th and 16th centuries, each claiming thousands of lives. The 17th century witnessed devastating resurgences, including the Great Plague of London in 1665, which killed perhaps 100,000 people. The English diarist Samuel Pepys recorded with unease the deserted streets and red crosses painted on infected houses. It was only with improvements in sanitation, changes in rat populations, and the rise of modern medicine that plague gradually disappeared from Europe. Modern science has since illuminated what medieval observers could not. In the late 19th century, the bacterium Yersinia pestis was identified, and its transmission by fleas and rodents confirmed. Antibiotics today make plague treatable, though it has not vanished entirely. Cases still occur in parts of Africa, Asia, and the Americas, but modern healthcare prevents epidemics on the scale of the 14th century. The study of the Black Death has also advanced through genetics. Recent research on medieval skeletons has identified traces of Yersinia pestis, confirming its role and offering insights into its evolution. Scholars now debate how the pandemic reshaped human immunity, population genetics, and even social psychology. The legacy of the Black Death is therefore not only demographic but civilizational. It exposed the vulnerability of societies to unseen forces, destabilized institutions, and forced adaptation. Out of the devastation came change, economic rebalancing, cultural innovation, and a shift in thought that helped lay the foundations for the Renaissance and modern Europe. Yet the memory remained seared into collective consciousness, haunting art, literature, and folklore for generations. Even today, the Black Death serves as a warning of how swiftly disease can alter the trajectory of history. In conclusion, the Black Death was more than a plague. It was a transformative event that redrew the map of human society. It collapsed the old order, accelerated economic change, provoked violence and creativity, faith and doubt, despair and renewal. In its shadow, Europe would never be the same. To study it is to glimpse not only the horrors of the 14th century, but also the resilience that followed, reminding us that from even the darkest tragedies, new worlds can emerge.